So welcome everybody. As Paula said, this is OTEC session number 4, the impact to traffic in 2020. So thank you for attending this electronic version of OTEC. We have a great session today. We have 4 speakers, and then we have a panel at the end. So the 4 speakers are from different, we have somebody from the Turnpike, from ODOT, COTA, and then we have a national expert in traffic data, as well as myself. I'll be attending the panel. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. Like I said, this is session number 4, the COVID impact to traffic in 2020. And our first speaker is Rick Schuman. So Rick is INRIX's Vice President for the Public Sector Americas. Rick joined INRIX in 2006 as the first employee to focus on building the public sector business. Rick has managed several key projects for INRIX, including the I-95 Corridor Coalition's Vehicle Pro project since 2008, which is still the U.S. largest third-party service provider contract, and from 2017, U.S. Federal Highway Administration's National Performance Management Research Data Set Provider, the default speed archive for U.S. federal congestion reporting requirements. Rick has been deeply involved in ITS and transportation operations for over 25 years and was an original staff member of ITS America from 1991 to 1999. Rick is based in Orlando, Florida. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rick.
Okay, sound check. Okay, see a slide. All right, so I have the task of kicking this off, the COVID session off. I'll focus primarily nationally and internationally with a little dash of how it relates to Ohio and various parts. This image here is not in Ohio, as you, I'm sure, are well aware. It's actually a Hotel Circle in San Diego, but that was a live image taken from somebody with an interstate open and nobody on it during the early days of COVID. At INRIX, we do a lot of things. We've been working with ODOT for years. In addition to our real-time traffic things, we're involved in doing similar things for parking worldwide, have analytics and trips data in particular, and those are the key things for what I'm going to talk about here today, is a little bit of traffic, but principally trips and analysis of trip data, the same underpinning data that allows us to provide our real-time traffic, but in trip form. So since 2005, 2006, we were actually the first company in America to leverage GPS data for generating traffic conditions. We did it before Google, Waze, anybody else existed. We started principally with commercial vehicles that had connected devices embedded in those vehicles, from long-haul trucks to local service and delivery vehicles. Obviously now with smartphones and connected cars, there's a myriad of sources. What I'm going to talk about here comes from an amalgam of all of those. We bring all these different types of data sources together. What you see on your phone in an application is a little caret and a dot, is essentially that information is being passed to INRIX in a variety of ways from a variety of different sources. And it's that taking that information, turning it into trip data, and aggregating that is what is going to be what we're leveraging here for most of what I'll talk about here today. So this is actually what an individual trip looks like. Each one of these dots is an actual GPS reading, breadcrumb, waypoint, call it what you will. Here's an example of a trip in the Salt Lake City area. It started in the upper left from a neighborhood and ended up in the bottom center at a Home Depot. So you can see there in a trip context, we know where it started, we know where it ended, and we know the route it took. So we do this for all kinds of things. Here's an example of a trip that happens to be in Oregon, but it's a trip from a Coca-Cola bottling plant to an Albertsons across the highway. And here's an example of a trip in the Pacific Northwest as well, from a rest area in just south of Olympia, Washington, to a rest area, or a truck stop, if you will, in Northern California. So those are examples of individual trips. We now have we're now aggregating data across well, dozens of countries, but principal to this conversation in America. In the United States, we now aggregate 100 million of those trips a day. Together, they generate about 1 billion miles of travel. So just take each of those individual trips, figure out where they started, where they went to, and the route they take, add up the mileage. We're over 1 billion miles a day. And nationwide, it's a little more than 1 in every 8 miles traveled when you compare it to the federal highway statistics. Across the country, that varies. Kind of in the corners, you'll notice, particularly upper corners, we're at about 7%. You get down in the Midwest, we have higher amounts of data. And in Ohio, we're a little above average at 13.6%. Let's just point out, for the context of what we're talking about here today, as far as COVID and the timing, well, COVID is no good time to have this from a context of what we'll show you. We have enough data now this year. We kind of, in stages in 2019 and 2020, we've actually ramped up our total, if you will, INRIX VMT from about 2.2% in February of last year to 13.1% in February of this year. So it's about a 6 times increase. And so this is one of the reasons why we realized we have enough data and things we were seeing internally would be of interest in the changes that are happening with travel patterns affiliated with COVID. So we started with INRIX, and real-time traffic is kind of the original thing we did. And I'm going to get started here. When we started talking about COVID and the impacts of COVID, we started looking at it in the context of speeds and congestion. We have since done about 40, we're in the low 40s as far as the number of blog posts, a combination of us. We have a research team and a few folks like me who got very interested and took it upon ourselves. I was actually creating a weekly update from late March through the 4th of July, or just before the 4th of July. So for about a quarter of the year, providing here's what we're seeing type things. You can go to our blog page, register for, you can see these directly, or register for anything that's being updated. That's all free. As I mentioned, we started with speeds. I live in the Orlando, Florida area, but we're headquartered in Seattle. And if you recall, way back at the beginning of March, it was the West Coast that had the first issues with the virus. And we're instituting kind of the first, forms of voluntary or mandatory travel restrictions. So originally we started with speeds and trends that are happening on commutes in cities. So you start to see drops in congestion levels, rises in speeds. You can see here the date, March 10th. This was the first blog post we did. And we focused here, you can see in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Things were changing. Not going to focus too much on the details, but again, thinking about the timeline. Fast forward 2 weeks after that, we provided an update. And essentially at this point, this was a little over a week into the lockdown nationwide. And at this point, the notion that speeds and congestion was essentially gone. And the context of leveraging speeds and the like. And you can see here's a table from this blog post that was done March 24th, which showed speed, the increases in speeds in afternoon and morning rush hours across the top 25 metropolitan areas in the country. I realize in this list there's none in Ohio. Things I'll show you in the future there will be. So at that point, it's kind of like, okay, well, if speeds aren't going to tell the story, what can? And people started asking us about volumes and VMT and the like. And we realized that from some internal tools we had that we're using to kind of quality control our trip data, we've been licensing to customers for about 5 years this origin destination data set. So there are customers, in fact, Ohio DOT is a customer of our statewide trip data in Ohio. So for every origin, every destination, we provide a complete trip description from when and where it started to when and where it ended and how it got there. We had a bunch of internal tools that we use to make sure we're doing that properly. And we started seeing the metadata, the number of trips we're seeing, the mileage and stuff change rapidly. And from that, we realized that there's a story to be told in the trip data itself. Some of you may have seen in late March, I actually published the first of what we call the traffic volume synopsis. I started putting them out every Monday for data for the week that completed the Friday before. So this is what the first one looked like, and kind of like most of the things we'll talk about here, it evolved. But we were seeing things, and again, as a professional, we were seeing the scale of changes were something that was just shocking, right? Now that we're at the other side of it, it all makes sense. But when you're seeing 10% drops in travel day to day in areas, it was just incredible to see. Sad, but also something we realized that there's a story in here, and let's start to tell it. Let's start sharing what we know. So over the course of, like I said, from late March to late June, we published 15 of these, and each week, some of you may have subscribed and seen these. There were some kind of go-to trends we monitored and published. Key one here is this is the relative level of nationwide passenger vehicle travel. Each bar there was a day. We compared it against the last week in February, the week before. So every Sunday was compared to Sunday, February 22nd, and the 23rd, 24th, etc. And so you ended up, if you had 80% here, that was basically 80% of the nationwide travel in passenger vehicles from our fleet that we had in our last week in February. You can see here we hit bottom in early to mid-April, and just before the 4th of July holiday, we actually completed, stopped doing the weekly updates because we were about back to normal. Normal is actually an absolute term. You can see here, if you do seasonally adjusted, we were still down about 10 to 15% from when the pandemic started. We tracked, for the first few weeks, I was tracking every state, every metropolitan area in different ways. Each one of these lines is a state. It's not incredibly important which line is which here, but the key here is you see from April, throughout the first half of April, pretty much every state had at least a 30% drop in total VMT from our reporting fleet, and some New Jersey, Hawaii, New York State were close to 60%. So, and then metropolitan areas, our tools track 98 metropolitan areas, including several in Ohio, which I will mention here. And everybody was down. All those 98 metropolitan areas in April were down at least a third, and in some cases pushing 2/3 of the traffic volume was down. So we tracked every state every week. And the last one I gave a chart. This is an eye chart, but every state kind of at the end of every week where the percentages were, and you can see how it kind of evolved. And this is the second half of the states here. Nationwide, we bottomed out again in kind of mid-April, early to mid-April. If we look at Ohio statewide was pretty close to a barometer of the rest of the country. You tracked very closely. You had some early, I'm sure you recall more prominently than those of us that don't live in Ohio. You all minded your P's and Q's perhaps quicker than most other folks in the nation, and you dipped a little earlier, but then you've been pretty close to a pretty good barometer of the rest of the country through the second quarter of the year, through June. So from that, as we realized, we went from kind of being leveraging some internal QA tools. We realized that there was the opportunity to share this on a more productized basis, if you will, and we rolled out in April what we call INRIX trip trends. And so you'll see very similar data and similar tools, but obviously a lot more professional, and we're carrying this forward. We have the trip trends. And now this gives you a sense of vehicle miles traveled, and I can pick several countries. I can pick all the states. I can pick those 98 metropolitan areas, other parts of the world. But here's a case of I've selected the U.S. and Ohio. You can kind of see here the normalized trends from the beginning of March through mid-October, which is on a few-day delay. You can see here by passenger vehicle, fleet, and long-haul truck. We separate them out, and the idea is to show an overall proxy. What we didn't have early on, we do now. Well, let me first kind of mention, in this case, in the tool, we leveraged the first 5 weeks in 2020 as the base case. You can make some arguments. So we had some changes in our fleet structure, and so we didn't. We felt the best thing for us to do to create kind of a baseline was using January and February data, understanding that there's seasonality in that, but for what we can do, that seemed like the best option. We did a webinar in late March where we kind of described the methodology of all this. I won't go into the details, but we put a lot of thought to it. This tool now, we actually have seasonally adjusted. And so you can see here that we got to, in the kind of around 4th of July time frame, with vehicle miles traveled, we got to back about the same level. We got to about 90% in a seasonal adjusted basis across the country. We've been sort of oscillating around that for the last several months. Ohio is slightly below on average the overall U.S. And then the tools, I'll just scan through some of these so you can see individually all the lines. There's like 7 lines there in gray, 6 in gray, and then 1 highlighted. This is the U.S. again, slightly above the state and the metropolitan areas that we're tracking in Ohio. Here's the state itself. You'll see some dips. This is 4th of July, happened to be on a Monday, so it compares to other Mondays. And in that case, it shows that we're not compared to a holiday, we're compared to typical Mondays. So you'll see those dips. We also, so the tool itself does vehicle miles traveled, we count by trips, the duration of a trip. So this is the time of a trip. Trips are being a little, overall, they're a little faster. I guess it would make sense with less congestion. Clearly, the types of trips have changed as well. And average trip distance has essentially stayed pretty close to the same. So these are the various metrics that we've been tracking. This slide here goes back to vehicle miles traveled, and it shows each line here is the red line is the U.S. One of the grayish lines is the state, and then the 5 metropolitan areas of the 98 in the country. We track 5 in Ohio. I'm going to scroll through kind of highlighting each one of those lines here in a second. This is our definition internal to INRIX, the definition of the metropolitan areas. These might not match up exactly with metropolitan statistical areas, but it gives you the sense we're calling apples to apples. So everything we're tracking in Dayton is against that geography, that polygon there in the left side of the screen. So scrolling through and looking at the whole state, here's a snapshot. One of the big dip days in the data, late March on a Saturday. The U.S. we had less than half of what we would expect on a Saturday. Ohio had a little over 40% total, and you can see how it varied by region. Toledo was the lowest, and Cincinnati was the highest at that given point. But I'll just kind of scroll through. Cincinnati here is kind of in the middle of all these. Cleveland, you can see here, again, those dips are the holidays. Columbus here, kind of in the middle. Dayton up a little higher, it's still hard to see. And then Toledo, we have an interesting scenario here I'll show you in just a second. Toledo itself was a little lower. You all know more about your state than I do, but I think there's a little more auto focus in Toledo, and early on there's a lot of plant shutdowns and things that may have lowered need for quote-unquote essential travel. Of the fleet and long-haul trucks, I'll just show a couple of slides. The fleet, these are local fleets, so there's the idea of box trucks, delivery vehicles that don't leave metropolitan areas. You can see the lines, the gray lines here are all the other, Ohio, the U.S., and the other 4 metropolitan areas. Toledo itself is trending higher. Again, not quite sure what that is, an increase in auto activity that meets some local fleet movements in and around Toledo, but I just point that out. pretty much everything else tracks what we would expect. Overall, nationally on the truck side, what we show here is trucks overall. We had about a 10% drop in long-haul trucks in lockdown in the early phases, but it manifests itself very differently across the country. You can see in Michigan was the hardest hit for most of the time. Michigan and Texas, and I picked Kentucky and Michigan to go along with Ohio here to give you a sense of how your neighbors fared. Kentucky was also noteworthy for a while. Again, I think the tide of the auto business has a bigger impact in Kentucky than maybe some other states. We did a report in late April, overall long-haul fleet movements. And again, Michigan, what it really boiled down to was borders, autos, and pretty much it. Borders and auto, international borders and auto really drove, and then oil. Those three things seem to have driven kind of the major changes where the states with the largest changes. A couple more slides here. I get through and then yield the floor. If we compare the U.S. to the other countries, here you can see here that Spain in particular had the most heavy lockdown. They were down in the 10 to 15% of overall travel in their lockdowns. Interestingly, you can see here France came back with a lot of weekend travel. These are weekend spikes. The summer hits. Both the French and people who were taking European vacations in Europe. They do a lot of travel in France. And maybe it's not a coincidence that France is now the hardest hit in their new wave of coronavirus cases. For the U.S. here, we didn't do as poorly from a percentage drop standpoint early on, but we have kind of languished a little lower than some of the others, at least for now. Interest of time, I won't spend any time on this next chart other than to show you we were tracking. Again, we have the ability to track like long haul vehicles, local fleets, and passenger vehicles across countries. We had another tool that allowed us to look at visits. And I think the thing here is what we're learning is even though we might be back in places with equal VMT, the nature of the VMT has changed. And I'll show that here in a couple slides before I close. So speeds, as I mentioned, essentially congestion disappeared, speeds went up. We started seeing speeds kind of coming back down. Again, this is those 25 metropolitan areas. Average speed drops the increases in speed started coming back. They were still better, relative to where they were pre-lockdown. But our supposition is that we're seeing, and clearly the morning peaks were or still way lower than the evening peaks. I think we have two suppositions here that was less obviously work travel, and the nature of the mile traveled has changed as well. Maybe it's not on to and from work. Maybe it's less on the interstates. To kind of show that, I pulled this last week here. I took a week's worth of data on Ohio, basically the interstate system, from our probe data analytics tools that you all use as well. I took a week, so 24/7, Monday through Friday, the first week in March. I did basically the same apples-to-apples comparison in the bottom of the lockdown, like last week in March, beginning of April, and then just the first week in October. And the key point here is we have a metric that's kind of a way of getting total delay. And if you go against the baseline of the first week in March, 3 weeks later, essentially 95% of that total delay, which is like estimate of volume times minutes of delay, it was down 1/20th the level. And now we're back to about a little less than 3/4 the level. So still less congestion, but way off the highs. We get asked a lot. I just thought this would be interesting to share. We get asked a lot from the media about, because we see national conditions, international conditions. this is kind of how media interest has evolved from where did, how are speeds impacted to, again, what's the overall volume, clean air. Those of you that are involved in PR, you probably have seen, you probably follow this arc as well. Kind of thing, do we have excessive speeding? Now what's happening, in places where transit is a large share of the typical commute patterns and usage patterns. If people aren't going to take transit, they're going to start buying cars, or we're going to end up back where we were, but worse, and so on and so forth. We've done a bunch of research publications. Again, you can go to INRIX.com research for those, a little more in depth than the blog posts, all available for free, and subscribe. And the last thing I'll say is this data that I've been sharing with you, in fact, through the National Renewable Energy Lab, USD here at this bts.gov COVID-19 page. And one of those is they're basically creating, using their daily vehicle travel, using the data that I've just showed you. And you can go here and they update it weekly. You can kind of go and get that information, and also in the context of other data sources and types that they're tracking as well through BTS. So I'll close it there. A lot to digest. Apologies if I ran a bit long, but it's been an eventful year, as I'm sure you are aware.
All right, thank you, Rick. All right, so just to clarify, questions, please put your questions in the question box, because we do have a panel at the end, and if you do not do that, John MacAdam is going to read through the encyclopedia to make you get your CPDs. So please put any questions you have in these in the question panel. So next we have John MacAdam, who is my fellow co-chair of this traffic management subcommittee here at OTEC. So I forgot to plug, we do have another session that is future impacts of traffic of COVID, and that is session 12 on Thursday at 1:30. So John is moderating that session as well. So please attend that if you like this session. And with that, I will go through here and introduce John. So John MacAdam has worked in the operations at the Ohio Department of Transportation Center for 15 years. He oversees Office of Traffic Management, just currently from his basement, as you can tell. And him and his wife Ashley have 2 wonderful children. John is passionate about solving problems and using technology. So with that, I will pass it off to John.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, so this is going to be a nice continuation of what Rick just went through. So thank you, Rick, for setting that up. And thankfully, some of those Ohio numbers you pulled out are going to match what we're showing. Otherwise, that would have been fairly awkward. So thank you for setting that up. I'm going to go through, here's my agenda. I've got 6 topics that I'm going to be focused on. First, we're going to look at the statewide immediate impact. When did we notice it? How did we notice it? What were some of the early indicators? Then we're going to look into traffic counts. We're going to then look at traffic incidents and how that's changed. We're going to look at the overall mobility impact. And then we're going to kind of summarize. We're going to zoom out a little bit at number 5. We're going to summarize it. And then just an oddball observation for number 6. If we have time. I do want to say, I know a lot of people are in this session that worked on a lot of dashboards that we're going to show. So shout out to Stephanie Merrick, Bill Welch, Sandra Maple, and some of her team. So there's a lot of good stuff that ODOT's been doing to track the impact here. And I'm thankful just to be able to present that work. So we'll start with the immediate impact that was noticed right away. So as a reminder, in Ohio, the session, the shutdown, the stay-at-home order, was basically from right between the 2nd and 3rd weeks of March through till about May. It started to open back up. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with. Our governor was on top of it very early, and as Rick said, we complied. And so here's some of the early indicators that we noticed. We can see here, this is the user delay cost, the same data that Rick mentioned from INRIX, and this is the daily user delay. Into February, we were hovering around 600,000, maybe jump up to closer to 1 million if it's a bad winter day or something like that. And then right as we get into March, you can really see boom, right here. I mean, it really fell off at that second, third week of March. And this March 20th, we'll just plant a little flag there. We'll come back to March 20th. That was an anomaly. But the rest of it, you can see we really fell off to the point where the weekdays were starting to look a lot like weekends for user delay. Another way to look at that is week by week user delay. You can see every week leading up to through February was at least a 2 million weekly user delay cost for the state of Ohio. Or if you look over on the right axis, that equates to a person hours of delay of roughly about 80,000 or so, oftentimes higher. Again, look right there, week 2, week 3, it really fell off. One of the other things we looked at was just simply taking a look at the bottlenecks across the state. And really, we've got some fascinating data to show on bottlenecks. This is blue is 2019, orange is 2020. And you can really see right there in that fall off again in that second and third weeks of March. The bottleneck impact factors really almost disappeared. And it was the same way in April too. We'll get to that. So a bottleneck impact factor for reference is the length of the bottleneck in miles times the duration of the bottlenecks. And so you add all those together and it's anything longer than at least a mile and it stayed out there for at least 10 minutes. If you look at the week by week bottlenecks, again, we really kind of took out the impact factor to almost nothing that third week of March. This is across the state. One other thing to look at is our freeway safety patrol. We've really been encouraging and working with the FSP to assist at the scene of crashes more frequently, provide traffic control, alert motorists that they're about to come up to the end of the queue, that type of thing. And so you can see in 2020, they were trending a little bit higher on those types of incidents. And then, of course, once they get into March, they really fell off in that second, third week of March. Okay, so that's enough of an immediate impact, what we noticed across the state. Let's go ahead and take a look at traffic counts. Just a note, if you want to follow along, I'm going to be sharing my screen and I'm going to be using a few dashboards. A lot of these are publicly available. If you go to ohiotismo.com, if you'd like to follow along. First, I'm going to be using the traffic counts dashboard. Now, the one I'm showing at this point in time is only available for ODOT folks on the VPN or on ODOT's network, but you can click the public report to follow along. And if later, I'll be spending the rest of my time on this COVID-19 mobility dashboard. So if you want to go to ohiotismo.com, you'll get to follow along. So let's start with traffic counts. Okay, so you may have seen this chart. This is week by week impact of and it mimics what Rick showed us, thankfully. This is all the traffic count stations in the state of Ohio. And you can see right here, week by week, where we compare to 2019. First week of March, exactly the same. Second week of March, 6% down. And look at so there's a couple things I want to point out. Blue being passenger vehicles. Look at the sharp decline throughout the end of March. And then the steady through April, steady about 50% below where we were the year before, and then the slow recovery through basically the beginning of June. And since June, passenger vehicles have been basically level. So again, at a passenger vehicle level, we're right about 15–16% each week below what we call normal from the year before. But the trucks are a different story. Again, you heard Rick talk about the need for freight and how that's even been increased over time. You can see they fell off in March and April, but only down to about a 20% reduction. And they recovered, again, by June, right there at the beginning of June. And then in most cases, ever since then, they've been higher, 5, 6, 7, 8% higher. So on the whole, this equates to about now at this point in time, about 11 or 12% reduction total. And again, you can come over to the dashboard that the traffic analysis group has put up. And you can see, you can change the date and we can say, hey, since right there at the beginning of March, when things started shutting down through today, we're about 22% down. You can come in here and take a look at the specific month. Let's maybe go look at last month's. Take a look at September, and we're, again, 12% down. That's been holding steady for a while. And then they also have a regional tab on this dashboard, which is kind of nice to be able to drill down and see a little bit more granular. They got these regions set up, and for this time frame, how is each region reduced? And you can scroll down and you can see, again, the chart down here. So let me zoom in on September again. Total with the passenger vehicles and what the truck difference is from the year before. And then down here you can see we're holding pretty steady throughout the month of September, right there about that 11–12% statewide. And here's a Labor Day anomaly, but I think you get the idea. So that's where we stand with traffic counts across the state. Let's take a look at incidents and how the traffic crashes and incidents across the state. Okay, we're going to go to that second dashboard. This is the one that everybody can open and bookmark and view either with me or after the fact. It's that top link. So this is what it looks like here. And let me just explain this dashboard a little bit. You have a map of everything that we have filtered out of all the incidents. Up here you have the same incidents charted. And you can see right away, I've got 2019 through the end of August here. You can see really the difference. You can see the dip even just in this little chart. And of course, we can blow this chart up. We can take it full screen if we want to. Take a look at the difference there. So these dashboards are really great. Let's go ahead and head back. So what I want to do here is I want to just filter on the month of March so we can kind of see the difference. So if I filter by March, you can see, okay, here's the difference in 2019 to 2020. And you know what? Let me just go ahead and filter those years out. In 2019, we had 882 incidents. And what do we have in 2020? 786. Now the data source for these are the ones manually entered by the TMC. Now I mentioned that March 20th early. So if I click here on this big spike, we're going to see that looks like an anomaly. And look how much flooding we had come through the middle of the state. So that's really what drove those numbers up there. I could even filter this out by flooding. You can see that's an unusual amount of flooding. That's about as much flooding as we might get for some months. So that's what drove that one up. And that's why we had some bottlenecks on that day. Again, and then let's take a look at April. April was the worst month for the biggest difference between 2019 and 2020. So quickly take a look at 2020. Give me a second. So April was, if you remember, about 50% reduction on traffic volumes. So if we come in here, and we filter on April, nothing like sharing our screen with 700 people, Ryan. Here we go. Okay, look at the difference. We're basically half. And if you go through and run the numbers, we are basically half of 2020 from where we were in April 2019. And so where we are now, if we look at a future month, like maybe July, we've come back to much closer to where we were in 2019, but we have not come all the way back on the incidents. If I come in here and filter by crashes, you get a better picture of where the traffic crashes stand. Again, we've come almost back, but we're not back. 2020 is still lagging behind on crashes. Now, unfortunately, we'll get to this. The severity of those crashes are worse in 2020 than they have been in 2019. So that's a little bit of what we got going on with crashes. Let's take a quick look at mobility. So if we use that same dashboard and we flip over to the second screen, this is probably the one that tells the best story, and this is a lot of what you saw from RIX nationally as well. What you have here is on the top left the user delay, and this goes week by week throughout all of 2020. On the left side, again, you have the user delay hours, and on the right side you have the user delay cost. And take a look at April, where we dipped end of March through April, how we almost eliminated delay. And even still, we're only back just above half of where we were. So that's the user delay. Down here, bottlenecks impact factor, same trend. Here at the top right, average peak hour speed. Now, just like Rick said, The afternoon peak hour speeds are coming back. Here we're getting in through August and September. You can see that the blue and yellow here are the 4 and 5 o'clock hours statewide. And you can see those are starting to come back down to where they were back in February. Now the morning rush hour is still up about 64, 65 miles an hour average for the peak hours. So we're the same thing here. We're seeing the afternoon start to come back. Now, bottlenecks themselves, let me go ahead and filter this by month. So if we look at just March, take a look at the bottlenecks down here on the bottom right. Blue is 2019, green is 2020. Look at March week by week, how the bottlenecks just bottomed out. If I jump over to April, we essentially had no bottlenecks. That 95% that Rick talked about is a real thing. May, same thing. Still no significant number of bottlenecks across the state. June, in June they started to come back. In July they started to come back, but still well below where they were. So you get the idea. So that's where we stand with bottlenecks. Now, unfortunately, the worst part is even with the traffic volumes down and even with the bottlenecks reduced and the delay drastically reduced, we still see month by month fatal crashes and total number of fatalities have been up for the year. What you see here in green is 2020 fatal crashes on the top left and 2020 number of fatalities in green on the top right. For the months of May, June, July, and August, you can see VMT was well below where we were the year before, but fatals and fatal crashes were above. So that's very disappointing. And here's a way you can look at this. If I filter by a month, again, let me start with March. And then they got this really cool feature where you can drill down. Now for fatals, it doesn't look so good on day by day, but look at VMT day by day down here. This is estimated by Streetlight using INRIX data. And you can kind of see as I jump through, if I go to April, you can see the VMTs again way down below where they were. I'm going to actually bump this one back up. And again, unfortunately, throughout the summer, even though VMT was this far down, like in May, for example, the fatalities were higher. In this case, almost 20 higher than they were the year before for the month. June, same thing. So that's the trend we've seen with mobility in the state. Okay. A few other things just to wrap up. Ramp meters have not been activated for congestion since March 11th. Also, Smart Lane has not been opened for congestion since March 13th. Both of those things have been activated for incidents and whatnot, but for the purpose of peak hour congestion, they have not been activated. Now, Smart Lane might open this week. Again, that afternoon rush hour is starting to come back, and there's a chance that opens this week. The annual toast list, we've now switched over to use calendar year. We normally would have put that out for fiscal year. This is where ODOT says, hey, here's the sections of the highway that are operationally sensitive and might be able to go after some TSMO money. We weren't going to go through the end of June because that data was so unusual because of COVID. So we released it based on 2019 calendar data. Okay, so the summarized impact here. So for 2019 versus 2020, what you see in green and gray are the volumes and the crashes month by month. It's interesting how those two follow each other so closely. Orange and blue are bottlenecks very closely, but even in September and even these first couple of weeks of October, where we have about 11 or 12% reduction in traffic volumes, we still haven't seen the serious delay and bottlenecks come back. They're still at least 2/3 gone from the year before. We thought we'd be able to show where that threshold, we haven't crossed that threshold yet, where the volumes that we have, so it's somewhere 10% or less, are basically eliminated the majority of delay and bottlenecks in the state. So this has been a fascinating experiment throughout the year. Again, we haven't crossed that threshold yet. Okay, just a very quick update on a weird technology thing we saw. For our OGO app, every year, you can see we go year by year, 2017, 18, 19, 20. Every year except this year, we've been adding users. I took out the winter months. 2020, we basically have the same number of sessions that we did back in 2018. So we lost all the gains of 2019 on our mobile app, just worth noting. Another weird thing on the OGO website, normally, this is through 2019 and 2020, normally we have about 100,000 unique users every month, and now we've gotten about 60,000, so that's dropped. But the page views have not, so this was odd. They dropped in March, and then they came back up. We get about 1 million page views on our OGO website each month, and so we don't know what that means other than, again, here's the average user, how many pages they viewed before COVID. People are using technology different after COVID because people are viewing about twice as many pages on our OGO website after COVID. So is this indicative of a long-term technology impact, usage change? Who knows? That's just something we wanted to point out. And the last slide I have is the most important observation we've made all year is that we have received 0 urgent phone calls from our chief engineer stuck in traffic since March. I know Al Beal's on here. I know he would appreciate that. And that is it.
All right. Thanks, John. So that was John and his discussion on statewide impact. So now we're going to move on to Travis Bonnett, who is going to talk about the impacts on the Turnpike. So Travis Bonnett serves as staff specialist for signing, pavement marking, maintenance of traffic, and other related issues for the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. Duties also include project, detailed design, and construction management. He served as the project manager for Ohio's Turnpike Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Proof of Concept project. Prior to joining the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission, Travis worked for Ohio Department of Transportation as the District 12 traffic engineer. In this capacity, he served as a specialist for traffic signals, highway lighting, signing, and pavement marking. He also assisted construction personnel with traffic-related issues and reviewed design plans for compliance. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Travis.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I'll go ahead and get started. I'm not going to show video, so you guys can concentrate on the slides and, also not have to look at me during the presentation. So good afternoon. My name is Travis Bonnett. I'm the traffic engineer for the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. I'm going to discuss the effects the pandemic has had on various Turnpike operations. Just a quick overview of the Turnpike. The Commission is responsible for operating 241 miles of limited access toll road spanning along northern Ohio from Indiana to PA. One of my employees once pointed out, though, that it's not 241 miles, it's 482 miles because he has to maintain both directions. The Commission is a self-funded entity. Approximately 98% of our revenue is through toll collection, and annually there are about approximately 3 billion vehicle miles traveled along the Ohio Turnpike. The Commission operates 31 toll plazas, 14 service plazas. We have 8 maintenance buildings, 3 highway patrol posts, and our administration building campus is located in Berea, Ohio, just south of Cleveland. And all of these were affected in their own way by the pandemic. So here's my agenda. I'll quickly review how the pandemic had impacted traffic, revenue, work zones, our toll plaza operations, our service plaza operations, our maintenance operations, and also law enforcement. So let's start out with traffic. Obviously, the pandemic affected traffic. After all, it's the title of the seminar you signed up for. So like most transportation agencies, as we went through the pandemic, we compared our 2020 traffic volumes to our, the same day in 2019. So Monday to Monday, Tuesday to Tuesday, et cetera, to determine those changes in traffic. Since we have a gated system along the Turnpike, we have 24/7, 365, hourly counts between every interchange. So the chart you're seeing now reflects an average of these individual count locations. So this chart specifically is a comparison of Monday traffic. So most of the weekdays followed a similar pattern. So this shows Monday from February 3rd through Monday, October 19th. Excuse me. The black line is all traffic classifications together. So we saw some reduction in traffic at the beginning of March, as the colleges started sending students home. And then starting with the shelter-in-place order on March 16th, we were down about 7.3% compared to 2019. By the following week, traffic had dropped 34% below the previous year's traffic. And then traffic continued to decline until it reached a low point on April 20th, where we were almost 58% below the previous year's traffic. Traffic slowly has crept upwards through the Independence Day holiday. Then there was a slight decrease again, and then it started to climb back up. So the orange line on this chart is just commercial traffic. It followed a similar pattern, but like John showed, it didn't drop as far, and it seemed to recover faster. So the spike in the dip you see at the end there, that's like John had showed, that's from the Labor Day holiday because it was a week later than the previous year, so that kind of messed with the traffic data there. So on the Turnpike, just like most rural interstates, Monday through Thursdays traffic is just commuters and commercial traffic, and then Friday mixes those two with pleasure travel, and then Sundays mostly pleasure travel. So this chart is showing what we saw on our Sundays, and we saw the biggest effect on traffic on Sundays on the Turnpike. So this shows Sunday, February 2nd through Sunday, October 18th. So the green line, once again, is all traffic classifications together. And the lowest point on Sunday's chart was 67% below the previous year's traffic, compared to, Monday was only 58%. And then Sunday was sub 50% reduction for approximately 6 weeks, where Mondays were only sub 50 for approximately 2 weeks. So let's talk about how the changes in traffic affected what we as toll operators are the most concerned about. That's revenue. This chart shows the percent change of 2020 traffic and revenue compared to the same day in 2019. So it represents January 30th through October 19th. So the orange line is all traffic classifications together, and the gray line is revenue. And the red line you can see there is obviously, even 0% change. So we're still seeing traffic down between 10 and 20%, depending on the day of the week. The pandemic has affected traffic, which obviously impacts tolls, our concessions at our service plazas, and our fuel sales at our service plaza. So right now, the commission is expecting about a $46.8 million revenue shortfall in 2020, where out of that 46.8, $40.5 million is from the reduction in toll revenue. In 2021, the commission is expecting about a $44 million revenue shortfall. However, only $28 million of that will be from reduction in toll revenue. About $10.4 million will be reduced because of the change in the short-term interest rates at the beginning of 2020. So they went from 2% at the beginning of 2020 to 0.15% in 2021. So far, the commission's long-range plans assumes that we will be back to normal sometime in 2022, and we are hoping there will not be a lingering revenue impact beyond those lower interest rates. So let's talk about everybody's favorite thing to hate, which is work zones. The Turnpike uses a permitted lane closure chart, which is similar to ODOT's chart. ODOT lane closure chart, and this is to restrict when lane closures can take place. So the Turnpike is divided into separate sections between each toll plaza. The charts shown here are for the 3-lane section between I-71 and I-77 near Cleveland from May through July. So as you can see on the far left in the red box,
hey Travis,
traffic, you would not be able to close 2 lanes from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. pretty much Monday through Friday. Due to the pandemic and the reduction in traffic volumes, we decided to allow adjustments to the permitted lane closure schedule.
Travis, we're having some trouble with your audio. If you could please go to your audio section and toggle it for me. Just toggle to phone call.
Is that any better?
That's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay. Do I need to go back at all?
If you could just a bit. It's been that way since you started in the beginning. However, we can re-record this section and we'll pass it out to everyone. I don't know that we have time to cover your complete section again. I do apologize. I didn't want to interrupt you. I thought maybe it would get better, but we can hear you a lot better right now.
Okay. So I'll just start here. Work zones. Turnpike uses a permitted lane closure chart that's similar to ODOT's to restrict when lane closures can take place. Turnpike is divided into separate sections between each toll plaza, and the charts shown above are for the 3-lane section between I-71 and I-77 near Cleveland from May through July. So as you can see on the far left in the red box, with no reduction in traffic, you're not able to close 2 lanes from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. pretty much Monday through Friday. But due to the pandemic, the reduction in traffic volumes, we decided to allow adjustments to the PLC, and a committee was put together we met weekly and discussed what we were going to do for the PLC for the following week. We based our decisions on current traffic volumes compared to the same time period the previous year and any backups that had been reported the previous week. We applied the following reductions system-wide, moving clockwise from the original PLC, which is circled in the red box. We originally started with a 40% reduction in traffic from March 31st through May 8th. This resulted in all daytime restrictions being removed from the chart for this section. Then that was followed by a 30% reduction, 20 to 10, 15, 10, and 5. And then starting in all of those lasted a few weeks. And then starting September 5th, we returned back to the normal permitted lane closure chart. This is still, our PLC is still using 2019 traffic. We plan on continuing to use the 2019 traffic until we feel traffic has returned to normal. This, by changing the chart for this time period, greatly reduced the amount of night work that we were performing along the turnpike. Since we run a ticketed toll system and we have people that pay with cash or credit card, obviously someone must collect that toll. So let's talk real quick about the toll plaza changes that were made during the pandemic. The commission operates 31 toll plazas with a combination of full-time and part-time toll collectors. Pre-pandemic, 6 toll plazas were unstaffed, and those are circled in red here. So there was nobody at those plazas 24/7 prior to the pandemic. As the pandemic progressed, staff was reduced or removed at additional toll plazas, and those plazas are also outlined in red here. So as it progressed through March, we ended up closing down all but 10 of our we removed staff from all but 10 of our toll plazas. So you can see the chart. You see the chart at the bottom of the table there. The staff was basically cut in half at our toll plazas. Then on May 10th, toll operations reopened most of the unstaffed plazas and went back to only having 6 toll plazas unstaffed 24/7. So most of our toll collectors returned to full-time, although the number and hours available for part-time toll collectors is still reduced to this day. So to help reduce the number of interactions, we ran messages on our 54 portable changeable message boards to encourage customers to use credit or Easy Pass instead of cash. In addition to masks and gloves, plastic shields were added to the toll booths to help protect workers, and the booths were disinfected on a weekly basis. So our 14 service plazas remained open 24/7 during the pandemic. All those services were affected. Based on the governor's order, we closed the plaza's food court seating area, but takeout service was implemented at all concessionaires. Upon the governor's orders and approvals, we restored a quarter to a third of the seating capacity at the food plazas, or at the food court, sorry. We did not reduce staffing or janitorial service levels at our service plazas. Those resources were reassigned to focus on sanitizing common areas and touch points. Service plazas generate revenue, obviously, through the restaurants, gift shops, convenience stores, fuel sales, vending machines, ATMs, RV parking, lottery sales, etc. All of those were affected by the pandemic. So let's review 2 of them real quick, which is restaurants and gas sales. There was a substantial reduction in food sales. This chart shows combined sales per month in dollars for 2017 through 2020. So compared to previous years, sales were down approximately, $1.5 million in March, $3 million in April, May, June, $4 million in July, $2.5 million in August, and $1.5 million in September. And then when we look at, there was also a reduction in gas and diesel sales. So this chart shows the reduction in the number of gallons sold per month for 2017 through 2020. So fuel sales were down approximately 1.2 million gallons in March, 2.8 million gallons in April, 2.2 in May, 1.5 in June, 1.4 in July, and we're starting to see those come back up. So we're only down 900,000 gallons in August and 400,000 gallons in September. So like other transportation agencies, our maintenance operations were also affected during the pandemic and continue to be. So at first, we divided, for the first 6 weeks, we divided maintenance forces into separate crews, A and B crews. And this allowed for the separation of the workforce. So if one employee at a maintenance building tested positive, we could quarantine the others, clean the building, and have the other crew come to work. That way we'd not lose an entire maintenance section of employees if someone tested positive. The crews worked alternating weeks, so they would not come into contact with each other. The crew that wasn't reporting that week was on call while they were at home. So as far as work activities after the first 6 weeks, the crews were combined again. And once crews were restored due to the reduction in traffic, maintenance forces were able to perform lane closures during the day instead of requiring night work. They focused on, standard work activities that lend themselves to social distancing, like policing the right-of-way, shoulder sweeping, some pavement repairs, bridge repairs, guardrail repairs, that kind of stuff. We also concentrated a lot on RPM replacement. We replaced more RPMs. We actually replaced more than double the RPMs. We replaced the entire 2019 season. Our freeway service patrol, each of the FSP personnel were assigned their own truck to prevent cross-contamination, and the FSP drivers were also told to avoid entering any of our maintenance buildings to help avoid cross-contamination as well. And then all maintenance personnel were advised to disinfect and clean all equipment both prior to using and upon completion of an assignment, so that you wouldn't have that cross-contamination. And we suspended use of shared devices. So, for example, our assistant foreman shared a desktop computer, and they were each assigned a laptop during this time frame. And then employee training, we purchased projectors for each of our maintenance buildings so we could continue with equipment training and annual safety training. Snow and ice, we still don't know what's going to happen this coming winter. Stuff's starting to ramp up again. So the Turnpike does cross 4 different ODOT districts. So we've had meetings with some of the districts to plan for snow and ice operations. What happens if our staff at one of our maintenance building, if somebody tests positive there and we have to send everybody home, or what happens at ODOT if that same situation happens. So how can we assist one another? So we've had those meetings recently. Let's talk about highway patrol. So enforcement, their job is enforcement, assistance to ill, stranded, or otherwise distressed travelers on the Turnpike. And the highway patrol is our law enforcement agency on the Turnpike. They're under contract through the Turnpike. So the troopers and dispatchers obviously are essential workers, so they maintain their full shifts at their current assignment. The troopers bid their shifts every 6 months. So the start time and the number of troopers on each shift are based on a projected crash picture and response needed at certain times of the day. But because of COVID and the crash picture and response time being less than, need being less than normal, patrol posts adjusted their start times and allowed dispatchers and troopers to work 10-hour shifts instead of the normal 8-hour shifts. So this allowed them to have less days they were working and being exposed to the public and each other. The troopers were encouraged to stay away from the patrol facility and could leave, from their house directly to go on patrol. And then after their shift, they could return directly home and not go to the patrol facility unless absolutely necessary. So the employees that were considered non-essential, like secretaries and other non-uniformed personnel, were allowed to telework during that time period. So during the initial months of COVID, patrol decided to only stop flagrant violations. This was done to help create a safer environment by protecting troopers from possible exposure. During that time, patrol felt, though, that this approach may have trained motorists that they would not, that patrol would tolerate higher speeds as long as they were not flagrant. So patrol felt the combination of less enforcement on traffic violations and less traffic resulted in traffic feeling more comfortable going at higher speeds. So across the state during that time, the rate of people traveling 20 plus over the speed limit more than doubled. And they also saw an increase in fatal and injury crash rates. So this chart shows citations through the second quarter of this year. Total citations were down 56% over the same time as last year. However, citations issued for speeds of 100 plus miles per hour were up more than double. for the same time last year. So that's all I have. Sorry about the audio problems at the beginning. So I will pass this back over to Ryan.
All right. Thank you, Travis. So for our last presenter, we have Kimberly Sharp. She's a certified planner and is currently the Director of Development for the Central Ohio Transit Authority. She has been integral to the implementation of the Linkus corridor system as COTA partners with MORPC, City of Columbus, Franklin County, and others to move this exciting Central Ohio growth strategy forward. Kim has served 6 years as the Deputy Director of Planning and Development for the City of Westerville, Ohio, and 8 years as the Comprehensive Planning Manager for Flagstaff, Arizona. Kim holds a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from Ohio State University and a Master's of City and Regional Planning from Virginia Commonwealth University. Let me pass this back over to you here. And
Ryan?
There you go. Do you see it?
Yes, sir. So thank you. That's development as in building things, not as in raising. Proud of the work that we've accomplished during coronavirus, during the COVID. It was very stressful on a lot of people, but we're definitely a data-driven organization where we looked at the data to try to make changes as quickly as possible and learn to pivot our service to serve those most in need. We also were able to split our operators into A and B groups to really protect our operators. And at our lowest point in April, we were giving out about 46.5% of our pre-COVID service hours out on the street. And then starting in early May, we started bringing service back. So I'll look at that very quickly with you, the data we use to make those decisions. The safety measures, same as a lot of people, focused service, essential travel only was really important. Masks required. We limited our rides of 20 riders per bus. We suspended fares. They have not started back up again yet. And that was to ensure people got on the rear boarding only. And then the cleaning protocols, the buses and the shelters are sanitized multiple times per day. We really focused and made sure that routes were maintained to the schools that are serving meals daily to children, the food banks, the medical facilities, and jobs. And we worked hard to match service to the service demand, to the operator availability, to the community services, and definitely essential jobs. We looked at ridership daily compared to the year before, the day before, the week before, by line, by hour, to understand where riders were needed and where lines were not needed because of the ridership and other factors. I'm not going to go into this, just an example where you can see on March 2nd what could be considered normal ridership and how you could see the ridership really going down over time per line. Some of the lines did not really go down a lot, and those are the ones really serving essential services. We also looked at ridership by location, by stop, and by hour, and matched those to services in the field. We looked at ridership, what we called crowding, because we had limited it to 20 people per bus. Therefore, when it's getting up close to 20 people per bus, we were tracking it to see if we needed to send out more buses. Or what we were calling dynamic service. At a certain time, our mainstream service was coming in behind and helping out where buses were needed to pass some people up because they were already full. We really pushed this service out quickly and made changes quickly. We made sure we mapped all of the schools and food banks, and we did not reduce any service that served these essential food access to our community. That, just looking at just more data that we took into understanding what was essential along those lines, and when there were some certain what we call pass-ups, meaning there were already 20 people on the bus, therefore the bus needs to keep going till some people get off. Where were those pass-ups happening and why, and what was in that location that would cause quite a few people to be using the bus, especially on days such as in the middle of April or May. You know, what is going on? And we really had to work closely with our community partners, the City of Columbus and MORPC and the social services, Franklin County's Family and Family and Child Services to understand where is service most needed, how can we help people get to where they need it to go. It's just showing priorities that employee safety, passenger safety are utmost priorities, essential trips, getting people to where they have to go, and effective use of resources. I have to note that pre-COVID, COTA is serving around 65,000 plus rides a day. And we're getting close, back up to about 50% of our pre-COVID ridership. This is just an analysis, a summary of the data that we look at every single day to understand the service that's out there, what is needed, how can we make adjustments to serve the population that need us the most. I'm just pointing out that the lowest point again was April 27th, but we're actually putting quite a bit of service back out there. September 21st, we added quite a bit. We're back up to 78% of our pre-COVID service hours, and we're heading back up to the 100% in January of 2021. We won't be at 100%, but we're working our way back up there. And we're using a lot of business intel. Where are the jobs? Where are the jobs growing? Where are the jobs not? It's not that they're not coming back, but where are they going to continue working from home? And where can they not work from home? And we're paying very close attention to that. Just a few notes on looking forward. I think I have a few more minutes. Even during the crisis, we are definitely planning for the future to understand how to be ready to be the best mobility choices for the community that we serve. A big focus, of course, of the corridors, which has been in the planning process for years. And that's to understand how a mobility system along key regional corridors that includes high capacity transit, transportation technology, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and development. It has to include the right development that makes it work as a system. And the reason, of course, is even during all of this, the Central Ohio region is still growing. And yes, there are definitely some jobs that are lost and some jobs that are coming back. Some people are still hiring, and it will take a while to recover. But Central Ohio is still growing, and we still need the transportation options for it to be viable in the long term. Just to note that the corridors is about more than just transit. It's about how we build in our community so that mobility choices and development make sense and they work very closely together. And we are spending time making sure we're learning from other communities, how they did it and how they did some very interesting and innovative things. I'm going to just point out Minneapolis. If you have a chance to look at their corridors of opportunity, it's how they really matched infrastructure investments with investments in housing choices and small business entrepreneurship, local businesses, revitalization efforts to make it really work equitably for the community. So it really opened up opportunities for a lot of people. And under this one, I just wanted to point out in Austin, they do have a $7.1 billion levy on the ballot this fall. That includes $300 million for anti-displacement housing strategies. I'm just pointing it out that a lot of the communities are understanding that you must match transit and transportation and mobility choices with land use and development choices. So that right now we're looking at the east-west corridor as well as the northwest corridor. Both of those are currently under study and with different options of either a bus rapid transit or a light rail transit. And what's really important is understanding the development opportunities along the corridor and understanding what it would take. But it's development that is for all the community. So with that, just a couple other points of focus forward. We have launched a couple of new on-demand transit areas during the pandemic, noting that half of COTA riders are commuters. And a lot of times it's how they get into the system, that first or last mile is sometimes a bit of a hiccup. So you can see Grove City has been launched last year. Westerville launched this year in August. This is the northeast bus on demand zone. It's a bus on demand. So that is new and different. And it's where you can get to the airport. You could also get to the New Albany Business Park. And then we're looking at launching the south side in November. And this again is trying to meet the needs in the community. And just a quick note, a big effort is being put towards contiguous county connections. We're working closely with the surrounding counties, understanding how they're getting their workforce into the work system, how folks are getting to educational systems. How can we partner better to make sure the connection points make sense regarding timing, location, and customer service? And we do want to thank ODOT for assisting these efforts. And with that, we're also putting a lot of effort into technology and working with our community partners in providing the best mobility choices in the safest community. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Kim. We do have a question for you, but let's go to our panel here. All right, it looks like everybody's on. So we do have a couple questions we're going to field from our panel here for the last 10 minutes. I'm going to start with Rick's got a question. Many of them as we can, as efficiently as we can. So Rick, what data sources were added to increase from the 2% to 13% coverage that you showed? And also, does INRIX report traffic counts? The user is saying that they can only pull speed data.
Hey, can you guys hear me? I changed devices, so you should be able to see me now too, which I'm not sure is a positive contribution to the cause, but nonetheless, here I am. Okay, so we added, everything we added was in the consumer realm, a combination of mobile phones and connected cars, millions and millions, something like 10 or 20 million devices that collectively have been added in multiple stages in 2019 and 2020. So we kept the data that we had, including all our commercial data, fleets and local fleets, long haul trucks, and we've been able to add sources on the consumer side. I will say though, for the trip trends stuff, we intentionally separated into these three categories. We didn't try to, and we didn't want to overdo what we could do with trying to state, we understand that we probably have a different mix of percentages of consumer data, local data, long haul data across and within regions, and we didn't want to try to overstate that by creating single numbers. And as far as the count data, we have, let's put it this way, we're working our way towards these things. We do have, as John showed, a good bit of user delay cost reference in the roadway analytics tools. There is a volume profile that underpins that, an estimate of time of day, day of week, volumes by road segment. So we actually have that data available, and it's available as a product as well. And then the trip trends tool itself, but expect to see more in the count side of things here in the future from us.
All right. On to the next question. I'm going to combine some of these, and I think this could be multiple of us to answer the same question. So interesting that Ohio seems to be up almost 100%, but there's still many working from home. And my commute to work is much easier than it used to be. I think a very similar question along that vein is it possible that the difference in the relationship of volume versus bottlenecks is that peak hour traffic is lower as trips are now different? In other words, traffic volume is up due to those working from home making trips rather than people commuting at specific times. If you guys don't mind, I can actually, we've thought about that one a little bit. I can kick it off from our perspective, from a local perspective. So yes, as John showed, I mean, we're seeing in the city of Columbus very similar data where it dropped off and now a lot of the ADT and the volumes are back up, but it's different. We're not seeing those peak hours that we used to see. For example, we're allowing maintenance of traffic and work zone setups that we wouldn't have allowed prior to. So AM and PM peaks, we're allowing those to be set up during times that we would not in the past. So, but yeah, we're definitely seeing the peak hour shift. We're seeing really weird peak hours in some of our arterials. And we're seeing weird traffic patterns, which makes sense. Like downtown Columbus, we're not seeing the volume coming back. It's still really low. A lot of the outside, the periphery or closer to the suburbs, we are seeing that volume and that ADT taken back up closer to what it used to be. But like I said, the peak hours are not the same as what they were prior to COVID. So I don't know if either John, Travis,
yeah, I can
answer that.
piggyback on that, Ryan. And just to be clear, I mean, the data is, we're not 100% back. We're still at, from a volume perspective, we're still at about 90%, 89%. So it's not 100% back. The commuter traffic is for sure not back. And you'd be surprised. I think this is a good segue to session 12, Thursday afternoon. I believe Dave Holstein is going to be presenting on this. The hourly distribution is not as different as you would expect it to be. It's just we're lower. So yeah, it's that commuter traffic that's really not there. People are still driving. They're not driving to and from work, but like Ryan said, you get some odd things here and there where the hours are just random influxes that you wouldn't normally see. But it's not 100% back, and it's not, and the hourly distribution is not as different as you might think.
And I would agree with what John said, that we're seeing similar hourly distributions. It's just our volumes are down, depending on day of week, 10 to 20% still.
And I would say, well, we're coming at this differently, right? We're in the trip data, it's basically total vehicle miles traveled, independent of what roads people are taking. And we have a hunch, and hopefully we'll be able to tease this out over time, that where travel is back to that level, normal, because there are parts of the country that have 100% even seasonally adjusted. You may find that it's the percentage of, let's just call them big roads to small roads, VMT, it may be more diffused, that it's on lower level roads, that more of the travel is happening. Those roads either don't get congested, or people aren't even trying to count or look at congestion on those roads. And so we think there's some of that coming. So I expect we tease that out over time, and probably right when we have it figured out, it'll change again.
All right, Kim, I got a question for you. This is a specific question. Is there still a shuttle down at Rickenbacker for last mile service?
Yes, the great shuttle still runs from the COTA stop at the Rickenbacker all around to serve the different businesses down there. And I do know that both Pickaway County and Fairfield County are currently increasing their capacity to bring a couple of buses and meet about the same time at the same shuttle location to get people to work.
All right. This is a good one that has been discussed too. Is the crash severity due to higher speeds? Did people get used to the higher speeds that led them into trouble when volumes recovered? That's a great question. I don't know, John, if you can specifically answer that, because in the city of Columbus, I know fatals are up, but we have not had the data backbone to be able to answer that definitively yet.
Well, I think it's our guess is it's a combination of a few things, and those three things are speed, distraction, and lack of enforcement. So early on, especially through the early part of the shutdown and stay-at-home order, enforcement was way down, and even through to the summer, if you look at the enforcement stops from Highway Patrol compared to the year before, they were about half. And so you have lower volumes, therefore you can have higher speeds, and there's lower enforcement. And the distraction is still a problem. People looking at their phone in the vehicle. So our guess is it's a combination of those factors.
Yep, makes sense.
Can I just add that if you ride, sorry, Brian, just note that if you ride the bus, you can look at your phone all you want and there's free Wi-Fi.
Shameless plug, I love it. I don't know if John or Travis will be able to answer this, but does the gas tax revenue match up with the VMT for Ohio overall, and or specifically, Travis, is your collection kind of matching up with the VMT?
Short answer for ODOT is no, it's not a direct match. There's some similarities, but the short answer is no, it's not a direct match.
Yeah, so for the Turnpike, we don't receive gas tax revenue. We see very low gas tax revenue. We get only for what's sold on the Turnpike. But as far as tolls go, it it doesn't really match up because of, we toll based on vehicle classification, and different vehicles pay, obviously commercial vehicles pay a higher toll. And since we've seen an increase in commercial vehicles, actually revenue has been, isn't down the same. It isn't proportional because of commercials being up. It's kind of helped with the reduction in revenue. We're still down.
Same for ODOT. It's not as bad as we expected.
Yep. Yeah, it's been hard for us to correlate because of the gas tax increase last year. So trying to correlate 2019 to 2020 data has not been apples to apples for us as a city. But yeah, we have not taken as big of a hit as we thought we were going to. It's kind of picked back up for gas tax revenue. So I think the last one we have is Candy Maple just chimed in that she was saying with hourly distributions, the AM peaks have flattened some, but PM is pretty much the same distributions. So that kind of mirrors what a lot of people are saying, and makes sense. So with that, I think we're at 3 o'clock. I don't think we have any more questions really that I think we went through most of them. So thank you for attending our session. Thank you, panelists and presenters. And also, like John said, session 12 on Thursday at 1:30 carries us on the future impacts of COVID on traffic. So with that, you're all free to leave. And John didn't have to read from the encyclopedia. Thank you.